Okay, as I was saying, thank you to Patrick for inviting me. I'm delighted that Lone Star College Tomball is initiating a program on diversity. I chair or co-chair the diversity committee at Sam Houston State University, where we have 22,000 students, and we have programming just like this to promote diversity and help people think about diversity, and that's what I want to do today. Now, I'm a historian, and that's my primary emphasis. My research, my teaching, basically my scholarly life is about researching the past and trying to help people make sense of the past. So what I'm going to do is ask you right now to get out a sheet of paper, and I'm going to ask you 4 questions that you may think are pretty obvious, and they're about U.S. history. Okay, and I want you to write down the answers to these questions. Okay, so you're going to think these questions are obvious, easy to answer. First question, what is the United States? What is it? What is the United States? I teach United States history. What is the United States? Okay, second question. What is the appropriate date to start a discussion of United States history? That is, what's the starting point? And again, there are no right and wrong answers here. We're going to discuss these, okay? So I'm not trying, don't worry about it. Third, what are the themes of United States history? What are the themes of United States history? And finally, the question I want to ask you is the United States an exceptional nation? Why or why not? Okay, when you're done, if you'll look up, that way I know you're done, and then we can discuss these, okay? Question 4, is the United States an exceptional nation? Why or why not? Okay, so let's talk about your answers. Don't be shy here. Do you want a minute or two to discuss them amongst yourselves, or you want to just jump in? Let's just jump in. Don't be shy. Let's talk about the first one. What is the United States? A country, okay? It's a country. That's the obvious answer, okay? What else? A democratic republic. It's based on democracy. What's a republic? Who knows what a republic is? We talk about the United States being a republic. That's right. A republic is a form of government in which sovereignty rests in the people and they exercise it through their elected representatives. We don't generally participate in direct democracy. We're not making law on a daily basis, are we? I don't see any lawmakers in here. I'm certainly not a lawmaker. So that is, we exercise our sovereignty, our power, through our representatives. So we've got a country, we've got a republic, It's based on democratic principles of representation. What else? That's pretty good? Okay. When should we start a discussion of United States history? You're going to teach a class on it. I bet you're in a class right now or have been in high school, and my son is in 8th grade right now. He's studying United States history. What's the time we start our discussion? Well, give me some date. Surely somebody has some idea of a date. Okay, the first Native Americans. Well, that would take us back 20 to 12,000 years ago with the crossing of the Bering Land Bridge. Okay, that would be a good date. What else? That would be the peopling of the Western Hemisphere. 1776, exactly. Important because that's the time that the Declaration of Independence is drafted and issued. July 4, 1776. Okay, what else? Any other dates? Yes? 1763. We could talk about the ending of the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War, and the leading up to the American Revolution, okay? What about 1607? Anybody say 1607? That's the founding of Jamestown in Virginia. Or 1620, the founding of Plymouth and the celebration of the first Thanksgiving? Any other ideas? Okay, 1619. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Where's the 1619 date coming from? That's the date that, first of all, the first House of Burgesses met in Virginia. That was the first legislative assembly in the New World. The first representative assembly, remember your word republic, based on representation. That's when the House of Burgesses was created. But it's also, who knows what's going on in 1619? That is the era, that's the first Africans were brought to America. First Africans brought to America in 1619. 20 and some odd Negroes brought to Virginia, sold as slaves, and that's the beginning of what the great American historian Edmund Morgan calls the paradox of American history. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so let's go to our third quiz. So my point is, what started as a rather simple exercise of a country that's a republic, then we got to talk about the variety of people who live in the republic. So we heard about Native Americans, we heard about Africans, we heard about Europeans coming and settling and beginning what would eventually emerge in between 1763 and 1776 as the United States. Of course, you could say it was 1787. That's the drafting of the Constitution. There's a big debate about that. Now, let's go to question 3. Question 3 was, what are the themes of American history? Tell me about your themes. What did you write down? Freedom, okay. Freedom. Americans, are free basically to do what they want. Aren't they? I mean, you're pretty much free. You're here. You could have not been here, So you get to decide what you want to do. Okay, what else? You had a point? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oh my God, y'all are making all my points. Okay, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness taken directly from the Declaration of Independence. We'll talk about that in a minute, okay? What else? I have a feeling you all are very shy. So everybody's happy in the United States? Oh, we have a class system. Okay, we do have a class system. Do you all know that more than 40% of Americans who work make less than $15 an hour? Probably many of you. It's actually 42% of Americans make $15 an hour or less. That's almost half. We also have the richest people in the world live in the United States, like Jeff Bezos, who made something like $11 billion at Amazon last year and paid no taxes. You guys pay taxes? I would think you do. So we have, and I call it an oligarchy. We're led by the richest 1% of Americans. One of them is our president, knucklehead. So we've got class conflict. Any other conflicts? Everybody feel treated equally? We have racial and ethnic conflict in America. Isn't that a theme of American history? Racial and ethnic conflict? Slavery? Discrimination? Again, I return to the theme of the paradoxical nature of American history. We have liberty and property and pursuit of happiness as long as you're in the right group. If you're not in the right group, you might be the maid of the people who have the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. You might be cleaning their hotel rooms. You might be taking out the trash at the airport where they fly around the world. Right? So American history is a history of great paradox. On one hand, great opportunity, great liberty, and on the other hand, discrimination and class warfare. Is the United States an exceptional nation then? We talk a lot about American exceptionalism. When I teach a class of 190 people every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay? And in there, we get them going. Now, I asked this question, is American exceptional? And somebody said, like you did at the beginning, oh, it's a country, it's the greatest country on earth. Well, that may be. If you're in the right group of people, America probably is the greatest country on earth. If you're not, if you're in that 42% who makes less than $15 an hour, that's less than $35,000 a year, okay, in income. Folks, you can't live on $35,000 a year in modern America. It's a very difficult proposition. Some of you are probably trying to do it right now, and that's why you're here. Because you're trying to get a pay raise. You're trying to get the credentialing to get those higher paying jobs, to get those benefits, to provide for your families. Okay? And I think that's very important and a noble pursuit. But what I'm telling you is, as you do it, you've got to reach down and help other people. Pull them up to the same level, because we're all trying to do that. We're all trying to provide for our families, be successful, and reach that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I think. Okay, so what I want to talk about for a moment is that the United States is actually what scholar Benedict Anderson called many years ago an imagined community. An imagined community. Now, that's an important phrase, because how many of you know more than two people in here? How many of you know more than 2 or 3 other people in here? Okay? Most of you. Okay, how many of you know more than 5 people in here? A couple, okay. Most of you don't know. I don't know. I know Patrick. He invited me. Actually, we just met this morning personally, but we've talked and we were at the same conference together. So, but I don't know any of you. But do we feel like we're all Americans? Okay? We live in a community in our minds. That is what an imagined community is. I look out here in America, I see different racial and ethnic groups. I see different languages spoken. When Patrick said good morning, this gentleman right here said, Buenos dias. Why? Because he's representing his community. That's what he was doing. That's representing different communities, different faith traditions. I bet we have some people in here who are Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, non-believers, maybe some Islamic or Muslim people, maybe some people who are Jewish. That is, we don't all share the same faith tradition. We don't all share the same racial and ethnic background. We don't all share the same languages. But somehow, I guarantee you, all of you think you're Americans. You live in the United States. Well, what is it that's holding you together? What's holding you together in part is that you live in a community in your mind. And that community was created by the leaders of this country. And they put in your mind. How many of you have heard Rage Against the Machine? You've heard Rage Against the Machine? Y'all haven't heard Rage Against the Machine? Okay, what's that? The group, the musical group. The great band. Yeah, okay, well, I mean, fists raised in the land of hypocrisy. That's one of the lines from the songs. Fist raised in the land of hypocrisy. That's frustration. That's anger being expressed about some people who view America in one way. Those are the people who created America. And when they created America, they told us it's the greatest country on earth, and it's about democratic values, and it's about opportunity, and it's about progress. And what did they do? They built museums about it. When did they create the African American Museum in Washington? Roughly. The Museum of African American History. It's been open, it's been open 2 years, 2.5 years. Folks, African Americans were here, the 20 and odd Negroes, in 1619 before the Pilgrims got here, before the first Thanksgiving was celebrated, before Boston was established in 1630. Okay? And if you're Hispanic, your people have been here for centuries. Okay? So when I talk about American history and the way we present it, when you go to the museums, are you seeing this type of diversity? Or are you seeing a bunch of white folk? I mean, my experience is I see a bunch of white folk. I work at Sam Houston State. Right across the street is the Sam Houston Memorial Museum. Okay? Now, what population of people do you think inhabited the area that Huntsville currently sits on let's say, 1800? Who inhabited that area? Native Americans, right? No Native Americans in the Sam Houston Memorial Museum. Guess how many black people are represented in the museum? 2. Joshua Houston and his wife. Guess what the population of Walker County was in 1860? Who was in the majority in Walker County? That's a county 2 counties up. You go, this is Harris. I heard just a moment ago that Montgomery County is about 2 miles from here, 1.5 miles. And you go right north of Montgomery County and you walk into Walker County. The majority of the population of Walker County from 1850 to 1880 was African American. It wasn't white folk. The white folk owned the black folk till the Civil War. But after that, the black folk were free, and the men started to vote, and they elected representatives to the Texas state legislature. Some of those people were so despised by the white folk who ran Walker County that we can't even find pictures of them. They were Texas legislators. You think you can't find pictures of white Texas legislators? Hell, they're all over the internet. So what I'm saying is, when you talk about imagined communities, you're talking about people who have created a history for you. Your history has been created for you. They set up museums. They write textbooks. They teach the classes. They sit in the Texas State Capitol and they appoint the Texas State Education Board, who tells you what's in the TEKS. Y'all remember the TEKS? How many of you went to high school in Texas? I bet you remember the TEKS then, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. My son just studied for the colonial exam. He has it today on the 13 colonies. Not one black person on there. Not one. People, that is just bullshit. I mean, there's no other way to say it. We've got a problem, and it's called racism. That is the problem. Okay? Now, this is the way American history has generally been portrayed. Right here. This is called American progress. And we got over here a city, we got trains, we got telegraph cables, we've got progress flying across, bringing across with her telegraph lines and books. And here come the white folk. And there are the retreating, bare-breasted Native Americans. Oh yeah, and there aren't any black people doing all the labor that enabled the white folk to spread out to the west. But this is the idea of inevitable progress. We're going straight up, straight up. And how are we doing it? Because the white folk are taking over. Have you ever thought about the word frontier? What's a frontier? Like people in Texas always go, oh, Texas was on the frontier. What does the frontier mean? The edge of what? The edge of white folk. That's what it means. There were Native Americans here. There were black people here. There were Spaniards here. But it was the frontier because there weren't any white folk there. So we got to wait till they come out and then it'll be okay. Then the frontier will be what? Tamed. We're going to tame the frontier. All these savages here have to be tamed. So I think America is a great country. That's why I get so mad about it. Because America is a great country, and the point you raised a moment ago, I think is true. America is based on an idea, and this is the idea. This is the idea that's expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The governments are instituted among men based on the consent of the governed. That is a very noble idea. Okay? And the closer we get to the realization of that idea, the more equal people will be. We won't have 42% of the population making less than $15 an hour while we have the super rich flying in their private airplanes. What we've got to do is bring these groups together. And we have to use the government to do it, I think. Now, I want to talk a little bit about those questions I asked you. I think a lot of people think those questions are silly. What is the United States? I know what the United States is. When did it start? Well, it started in 1776. Well, the New York Times is running a major program right now called 1619. Just came out. August of 1619 was how long ago? Exactly 400 years ago. So 400 years ago was when the first 20 and odd Negroes arrived in the United States. And so the New York Times began a major campaign online. They have some of the best scholars and writers in the country writing essays. And this is what they say. The project is a major initiative observing the 400th anniversary of the beginning of American slavery. It aims to reframe, that's an important word, to reframe American history, understanding 1619 as our true founding, and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story about who we are. Okay? That is saying we're going to take 1776, we're going to take 1607, we're going to take all those other dates and we're going to throw them out. And we're going to reframe it around this. Now, what I wanted to play you is what Newt Gingrich said about this. Now, let me see if I can operate this. I don't know how to do this. What do I do? Hit enter? No, I don't do that. Open a movie in browser. That's fine. Uh-oh, am I not on the internet? Uh-oh. Oh, wait, I'm on my computer. Can y'all give me 1 second? How do I get out of this? Who knows? Who's an expert on this? Any tech experts in here? Swap displays in show. There we go. Let me see. I don't know what all that is. Let me just take that out for a second. Let me get online. Can I use this collaboration? Or no, Lone Star Visitor. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, we can get on the big one. Yeah, let's just do that. How do I do that? Perfecto. Okay, yes, that's perfect. And then just go to, I know what to type into YouTube. Thank you, Patrick.
I've always wanted to work in sound, but I wasn't sure how to make it happen. I could have gone to a four-year school, but at Crest...
All right, welcome back. Let's bring in Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, Fox News contributor. He writes a free newsletter available at gingrich360.com. He joins us right now. Newt, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, I'm sure you were watching a lot of television over the last couple of days. There's been a lot of reporting about how it looks like we're aiming for a recession because there was an inverted yield curve thing in the trade war with China. What do you make of it?
Well, look, I think every left-wing reporter in the country and every Democratic presidential candidate is desperate for a recession. It's kind of weird. You know, they're running to be president in the hopes that more Americans will be unemployed. And so any indicator of any kind that gives them an excuse to say, oh, the recession's on the way, the recession's on the way, just makes them feel good. Now, the fact is that the president's policies are working overall, that the decline, for example, in the cost of oil and gas and natural gas is the equivalent of a big tax cut, and that we're going through a lot of changes. And the changes in a free market, you get turmoil. You get somebody invents Apple, somebody invents a computer,
right.
Somebody invents a new drug. And so there's a lot of churning, but so far at least, we're probably the healthiest economy on the planet, and we're more likely to avoid a recession than any other major country in the world.
Newt, I want to ask you about the New York Times Magazine. I know you read it as much as you can, launching a new crusade to reframe America as defined by slavery and racism. Here's the headline. I want to show it to you. The 1619 Project, and the quote inside says, it aims to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 as our true founding and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the story we tell ourselves about who we are. You're a historian. Your reaction?
Yeah, the whole project is a lie. Look, I think slavery is a terrible thing. I think putting slavery in context is important. We still have slavery in places around the world today, so we need to recognize this is an ongoing story. I think certainly if you're an African American, slavery is at the center of what you see as the American experience. But for most Americans, most of the time, there were a lot of other things going on. There were several 100,000 white Americans who died in the Civil War in order to free the slaves. The fact is, I saw one reference that the New York Times claims that the American Revolution was caused in part to defend slavery. That is such historically, factually false nonsense that it's embarrassing that the New York Times is doing this. But if you saw the recent leaked interview, town hall meeting with the New York Times editor, he basically said, look, we blew it on Russian collusion, didn't work. Now we're going to go to racism. That's our new model. The next 2 years will be Trump and racism. This is a tragic decline of the New York Times into a propaganda paper worthy of Pravda or Izvestia in the Soviet Union.
Read all about it in the New York Times Magazine. All right, Newt, thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, my fellow patriots. I'm Cade Courtley, former Navy SEAL platoon commander.
How do I get out of this? Cancel. So my point, let me see if I can get this going again. Yeah. So my point is that Gingrich, why anybody would listen to Newt Gingrich anymore is beyond me. But Gingrich obviously feels like the New York Times story is, well, he called it a lie. And he said if you were black in America, slavery was at the center of your history. But if you aren't black, the implication was what? It doesn't matter. There were a lot of other things going on at the time. Yeah, there were. Most of them paid for by the labor of black people who were enslaved. Let me give you an example. Let me give you a thought project. What do you think the population of the 13 colonies that declared themselves independent in 1776 was? Any idea? It was 3.9 million. 3.9 million people in all 13 colonies. What do you think the population of the enslaved was in 1860? It was 4 million. So in the period between 1776, when the United States declared independence, and the Civil War, which began in 1861, the population of the enslaved African Americans in the South rose to be the same as the population of the initial 13 colonies. That's how big it is. We're talking about a big group of people. And let me ask you this, what was the economy of the North based on in 1860? What were they doing there? What were they making? Manufactured goods. What is the most important manufactured good of the Industrial Revolution? It's what you all have on your bodies right now. Textiles. That was the initial industrial product, textiles. Well, what did they make it out of? Wool? Cotton. Where was the cotton grown? Let me ask you this. What do you think bankers did in the North and all over the country during the mid-19th century? Let's think about this for a second. Any of your parents or friends insurance salesmen? Insurance folk make pretty good money. You know? Now, you think slaves were insured? You think banks and industry made money off slaves even though they didn't own them? What's the most expensive thing you own right now? Your car? You got insurance on your car? You damn right you do. First of all, it's legally required. Now, if you try to snake through that legal requirement and don't cover your car, I hope you don't have an accident today, because it's not going to go well for you, especially if you're at fault. So in the 19th century, where do you think the banking houses that insured the slaves, and I'm talking about 4 million of them, worth $4 billion, where do you think those banking houses were? They were in New York and Baltimore and Philadelphia. And who was making all that money off those slaves? The white bankers. I mean, it's not a trick. The people working in the North, processing those textiles. They're using the cotton grown. What was the number one export of the United States in 1860? Cotton. The United States produced more cotton than any other country in the world. And it was the number one commodity. And guess how it was made? All by slave labor. So I think Newt Gingrich needs to shut the hell up. They call Newt Gingrich a historian. Newt Gingrich is a chump. He has a history degree, which he wrote in Europe on the Congo. He never went to the Congo. He wrote a dissertation on it. Look it up. Some bitch, I don't like that guy. Why anybody pays any attention to him, I have no idea. Now, I want to talk about diversifying the story. So, it's one thing to get angry about all this, and I do. I get angry. I spend a lot. Look, I research lynching, folks, in Texas. I've documented over 700 lynchings on my website, lynchinintexas.org. Okay, I'm working with the Harris County Remembrance Project. We're about to establish 4 markers in front of the courthouse for the 4 lynchings that happened in this county. Happened in October. Watch the news. It was on Fox 26 last night. So that's what I'm doing. When you read that, then you get angry. There's no way not to. But what I'm saying is history isn't about executing your anger on the past. That's not good history. Good history is about trying to build context and understand. So when I say we're trying to diversify the past, what we're trying to do is change the narrative. So for example, I'm going to give you a couple of examples, then I'm going to be done. Okay? First example is this. Jefferson's Monticello makes room for Sally Hemings. This is a new exhibit. If you don't know this already, I give a whole lecture on this. Jefferson and Hemings. Sally Hemings was Jefferson's enslaved worker. She was Jefferson's deceased wife's half-sister. Jefferson's deceased wife and Sally Hemings had the same father. He was a white slave owner. Okay? Sally Hemings' grandmother and mother were both owned by Sally Hemings' father. So he owned all 3 of them. That was the way slavery worked. Why do you think slavery? Let me ask you a question. How did you determine if a child was a slave? Well, yes, the skin color, but what I'm saying is we got a baby born here. Baby's just born. Is that baby going to be a slave or a free person? How do we know? The mom. You know any other property that passed down the mother's side in the 19th century? No, you don't, because it didn't. Why did we pass slavery down the mother's side? Who do you think was having sex with the mothers? I mean, people, that's what I'm telling you. We know who was having sex with the mothers. The men who owned them. And they look just like me. That is why slavery passed down the mother's side. Thomas Jefferson had 6 children with Sally Hemings. 6. She was 14 and he was 43 when they started having children together. which was not that odd in the 18th century, actually, as grossed out by that as you may be. Sally Hemings didn't live in Jefferson's bedroom, though. She had her own room at the house. And when Monticello was opened to the public in the early 20th century, people didn't talk about Sally Hemings. It was a non-story. We don't bring that up. And it was refuted by most historians, because all the historians were white. Black people couldn't get a PhD in history in the early 20th century in the South. Where would they do it? You think UT gave degrees in history to black people? Black people couldn't even go to UT Austin until 1950, after they sued. Hispanic people, same thing. Women, same thing. You think there were any prominent women historians in the early 20th century? Hell no. So the history was written by white men. Well, white men didn't want to talk about this because their power was based on this kind of discrimination at the time. You remember Strom Thurmond, the great Dixie Cat candidate from 1948, who preached racism and discrimination and segregation forever? And then when he was about to die, what came out? He had a child with his black nanny, and he had been supporting that child for 50 years. I mean, so I'm not making this shit up. Go look it up. So this is Sally Hemings' room. Guess what they made it in the early 20th century when they opened Monticello to visitors? It was the men's restroom. The men's restroom. They put some stalls in there, some urinals, a couple of sinks. And so when visitors would come and talk about, oh, how great Thomas Jefferson is, let me go to the men's restroom. Well, that's where Sally Hemings' story was. Luckily now, we do have prominent black women who are historians and lawyers. And one of them is right over here from Lufkin. Okay? Her name is Annette GordonReed, and she teaches at the Harvard Law School. And she wrote the Bancroft Prize-winning, that's the book given to the best book, that's the prize given to the best book in American history by the Organization of American Historians. She won that. She won the Pulitzer Prize, and she won the National Book Award for her book called The Hemings of Monticello. And she tells the real story. It took her 20 years to write that book because there aren't any documents about Sally Hemings. You got to build it all from scratch. You got to go in and dig up the records yourself. There's no narrative. There's no diary. None of that exists. So she had to literally build it through context. Okay? So that's one example of somebody changing the narrative. And when she wrote that book and published it, and it made a huge splash and won all those awards, oh my God, now we're going to have a room at Monticello for Sally Hemings. That is called changing the narrative, diversifying the history. Okay? Another story. Now, I like a book by this guy named Ibram Kendi, Kendi. His book called Stamped from the Beginning is about the history of racist ideas in America. It won the National Book Award 3 years ago. Okay? And he says there are three types of people. There are segregationists. That's racist. They see people differently and they want to rank them and they judge people based on their skin color and race. Secondly, he says they're assimilationists. Assimilationists are racist, but they're like, well, the reason black people aren't quite equal is because they come from poor inner cities and they don't have opportunities. And once they get more like white people, then everything will be okay. That's an assimilationist. There's something wrong with them, but once they assimilate to white people, The same thing with Hispanics. And everything will be okay. Of course, there's ethnic too. Same thing with the Irish. Once the Irish quit drinking and stop acting crazy, they'll be like all the other white folk, and they'll be fine. That's called assimilation. Well, this is an example of assimilationist history. Back in the 1880s, there was a school founded in Pennsylvania called the Carlisle Indian School. And what they would do is they would take Native Americans, Sioux, Cherokee, Cheyenne, from the West, kidnap them, basically, bring the children to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. This is them on the left. Force them to cut their hair, change their dress, change the way they talk, speak English, and act like white folk. And when they did, they got rewarded. Oh, you're so great. You've made so much progress. That's called assimilationist history. Now, what we're doing now is being very critical of this school, Carlisle Indian School. Carlisle Indian School is also famous because back in the 19th century, after the Indian Wars, white men had to have a way to prove their manhood. And they couldn't do it on the battlefield anymore because the battles were over. The Indian tribes had been defeated. They'd been placed on reservations. So what were they going to do? Yeah, they're going to fight each other. How? Well, how many of y'all watched that terrible loss for the Houston Texans on Sunday or Monday? Was it Monday or Sunday? Monday. Yeah. They started playing football. They invented college football after the Indian Wars. 1880s, 1890s. Where was it played? You think it was played at state institutions? It was played in the Ivy League. Football was created at Ivy League colleges. Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Brown, Dartmouth, they all had teams. Well, guess who else had a team? Carlisle Indian School. And probably one of the most famous players in college and professional football history was named Jim Thorpe. He was Native American. He went to Carlisle Indian School. Guess, any of you gentlemen play Pee Wee football? You know, Little League football? What's it called? What's the name? Yeah. But what was the name of the league or the type of football? It has a name. Okay, you play flag football. When you go up into the league a little bit more, you play Pop Warner football. You heard of that? Pop Warner? Pop Warner football. Pop Warner was the coach of the Carlisle Indian School. When football was created, there were no passes. You couldn't pass the ball. It was like rugby. You'd get up on the line and you'd hand the ball off every time. Well, Pop Warner was the one who invented the forward pass. I mean, look it up. Sally Jinks, the real All-Americans. If you're interested in football, Native Americans, and this type of history, then look that up. Sally Jenkins' book, The Real All-Americans, is about the Carlisle Indian School. But this is an attempt both to criticize the way Carlisle acted, but also to celebrate people like Jim Thorpe and Pop Warner who helped contribute to changing the narrative. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit here about Texas. How many of you have seen the Netflix film, or the Netflix, I think it's a Netflix original, The Highwayman? Anybody seen that? You've seen it? What's it about? Exactly. It's about Bonnie and Clyde. And they were captured. You remember? Right at the beginning of the 20th century? And who captured them? The celebrated Texas Rangers. Texas Rangers have their own museum. The Texas Rangers killed over 100 ethnic Mexican and Mexican Americans in 1915 alone. And I don't mean just killed them, they lynched them. These are 3 Texas Rangers posing with the bodies of deceased Hispanic men who they killed. This was traded as a postcard, as lynching photos often were. The Texas Rangers were a white supremacist group that killed Native Americans, Mexicans, and blacks during the period of the First World War. And in fact, there was a man brave enough to stand up to them. His name was Jose T. Canales, C-A-N-A-L-E-S. Jose T. Canales, known as JT. He was a Texas legislator. He was the only Hispanic member of the Texas legislature in 1918. The only one. Now that alone would have made you nervous, I bet. But he took on the Texas Rangers. And he said, they've been killing my community down on the border. I want an investigation. And the Texas legislature started an investigation. The entire thing is online. It takes up more than 2,000 pages of material. And basically what it documents is the Texas Rangers' mass killing of Hispanic people on the Texas border. Guess what's not in the Highwaymen? That story. And guess who threatened Jose T. Canales? You better shut the hell up. The same guy who is celebrated in the Highwaymen for capturing Bonnie and Clyde. So what I'm saying is, this work has been done by one of my good friends. She teaches at Brown University. Her name is Monica Munoz Martinez, and her book is called The Injustice Never Leaves You. It will win, I suspect this year, it will win the Bancroft Award. It is the most important book on American history I have read in 10 years, because what it does is it talks about vernacular history. Vernacular history is the history that you all know about your own families. Oral histories, items you have in your garages and in your closets that document your family story that you can bring out and help to tell those stories. Okay, so let me end with this. This is a quote from Tony Judt, who was a European historian, but he says, the historian's task is to tell what is almost always an uncomfortable story. Y'all feel uncomfortable? Some of you do, I can tell. Some of you like what I'm saying, some of you don't care about it too much. But it's an uncomfortable story because the job is almost always to tell an uncomfortable story and explain why the discomfort is the part of truth that we need to live well and properly. A well-organized society is one in which we know the truth about ourselves collectively, not one in which we tell pleasant lies about ourselves. Our history is based on lies. I believe that. Newt Gingrich had that right. He's just the liar. He's the one who's trying to subvert and undermine and keep quiet. And I just tell you the opposite. I tell you all, go out, uncover the stories, be an investigator, be a historian. You don't have to just do history, do recent stuff. Go look at the inequalities all around. They're all over. You're not going to have to look far. I mean, at Sam Houston State, all you got to do is look at the professors. They're about 95% white. Well, that's called inequality, okay? And I don't know what it's like here, but I'm telling you, go out, look. Not just here, look at your high schools. Look at the community. Look at the city council. Look at the State Board of Education. What do you care about? Look where you care, okay? And I would say, I started with that picture of be someone. I tell you, be someone, as I told you before. Ibram Kendi talks about 3 types of people. Segregationists, those people who want to see race and want to see it as in a discriminatory fashion. You have the assimilationists who say, well, these groups have problems, but once they come along, everything will be okay. And then he says there's a group of anti-racist. And anti-racist call people out. You know what a racist meme is? How many of you have posted a racist meme in the past month and a half? I see some smiles. I guarantee you, if you've posted a picture that's funny and of a black person, it's a racist meme. I had the chair of the psychology department at Sam Houston State posted a racist meme yesterday. You know what a racist meme is? You know what a meme is, right? Well, something that makes fun of another group of people in an attempt to discriminate against them is a racist meme. So think about that next time you're going to post something on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or wherever you post on social media. And think about it when you read those and laugh at them. What they're meant to do is create a derogatory image of that group of people. That's what they do. So I would encourage, that's an easy way to be an anti-racist. Call your friends on it. They say something racist. Let me tell you what Ibram Kendi says. I end with this finally. Kendi says, racism isn't endemic to our personality. It's not intrinsic. It's not who we are. Our actions are racist. We take actions that discriminate against people. Okay? Not all white people are bad. Not all black people are bad. Not all Hispanic people. Not all people. You can't group people like that. But when we make fun of people or we discriminate against them, that's racist action. And he says, when that happens, call people on it and intervene. You have the power to intervene and be on the right side. Okay? Well, thank you. Do we have time for questions, Patrick? Thank you all, and let's have some questions or comments.
So we have a question back here.
Hi, thank you for your talk today. I really enjoyed it. What was the name of the book that you said that's coming out?
Well, the book by Ibram Kendi is called Stamped from the Beginning.
Right, and the last one that...
Oh, Injustice Never Leaves You by Monica Munoz Martinez. Also, Ibram Kendi has a brand new book out. The Stamped from the Beginning came out about 2 or 3 years ago. His new book is actually called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I'll just tell you, Ibram Kendi is an African-American guy, and the book is about how he was a racist. Mm-hmm. You know, and what he's saying is racism isn't about you as an individual, it's about your actions. And so, anyway, that's... Yeah,
What other questions do you have? I'll bring the mic to you so we can make sure we get you. No other questions? None of my students have questions? Okay, I'm coming up front.
Well, she has a question. You can just tell me. Well, what made me go into this line of history? Basically, just my life experience. My dad was a college professor. I went to school during the era of busing, okay? And I was bused down to, I lived in Nashville at the time, and I just saw the tremendous inequalities that existed in the world firsthand. Many of my friends were, from the community where the school was, and we just lived very different lives. And then I went to a conservative college where I constantly found myself fighting against other people who did not understand the social and cultural roots of inequality, poverty, for example. Then when I got my first teaching job at Norfolk State University, which is an HBCU in Virginia, I did a major project on the 17 individuals who desegregated the schools there, called the Norfolk 17, and just kind of went up from there. But it's just, it's what I read about and think about, so that's what, you are going to be what you read about and think about, y'all. That's what you're going to be, So read about and think about something you think's important,
Could you explain what HBCU is? That was
An HBCU is a historically black college or university. Norfolk State at the time I was there was the 7th largest HBCU in the country. Texas Southern in Houston is an HBCU, and you may be aware, you remember when the Bahamas just got hit by the hurricane, and one of the University of Bahamas schools was wiped out, and so Hampton University, which is an HBCU that also had large numbers of Native Americans there, they are welcoming for one semester students from the Bahamas full pay. They're going to pay their tuition, they're going to pay their room and board for one semester and help those students get back on their feet, and then try, I'm sure, to keep several of them there. That's a strategy, but it's also a humanitarian effort to bring them, give them the opportunity to remain in school.
other questions?
Oh, it's extremely powerful. I mean, okay, if you want to see another cool book, y'all know who Henry Louis Gates is? Do you all? Okay, so Henry Louis Gates is the W.E.B. Du Bois Professor of History at Harvard University. And he has a new book out called Stony the Road, which is about Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era. But basically, in the past, I tell students and colleagues, I used to teach Reconstruction as we would talk about segregation, we would talk about disfranchisement, the poll tax, the literacy test, the white primaries, and all that. You're probably familiar with all that. What I did not talk about until recently is the culture of the South. Y'all know what blackface is? You remember the governor of Virginia, the current governor of Virginia? They uncovered that from his college yearbook that he had worn blackface in college. Blackface is a form of discrimination. That's what it is. You put on, white people don blackface to make fun of black people because they put on blackface, and then how do they act? Like the fool. That's how they act. Well, that's a form of discrimination. That's what it is. That's the only reason you would put on blackface, to make fun of people. That's why people who dress up at Halloween as black people who are white, and then they put on blackface and they go out and act like an idiot. That's discriminatory, y'all. That's why when you go out to, Cinco de Mayo and you put on a hat and you act like a fool and you get drunk, that's discriminatory. You're saying that Hispanic culture is equivalent to being a drunk. That's not. That is discriminatory. When you post memes of people in a way that degrades them or makes fun of them, that is discriminatory. Well, that is what the culture of the white South was like. We had salt and pepper shakers, the uncle and the auntie, okay? We had games, Little Black Sambo. We had, it was everything you can imagine. From the dinner table to the games, to the children's books, to the toys. I'll tell you an interesting thing you could do. I do this. This will tell you how weird I am. I go to the antique shops and I look for racist memorabilia because then I bring it to my classes to show them this is the culture. This is the culture. What's in those stores is the culture of previous generations. What's going to be in your culture? Memes from Facebook. That's where we do. We spend all our time in social media. Where are you regenerating those ideas and coming in contact with them? In those spaces. So when you go out, stand up for yourself and stand up for other people. When you see those things, say, this is a racist depiction. It's not appropriate. I mean, that's it. You're not saying that the person themselves is racist. Maybe they're not aware of it. Had any of you thought about this beforehand? Maybe not. So maybe you're not even aware of what you're doing. That's how deep it is in our cultural consciousness. So just politely make people aware. Hey, it'd be better if you didn't do this. You know? All right, you all. Thank you so much. Enjoyed it.